Good morning, Gamecock fans. Today is Wednesday, July 9th, the year of our Lord 2025, and this is Coffee. Hope you are having a wonderful week. Hump day. It comes quickly, right? Won't be too much longer. We'll be talking about the first weekend of the season and heading to Atlanta and all that happy stuff. And I can't get here quickly enough for yours truly. I'm kind of at the point in my life where time goes pretty quick these days. And so I always have to remind myself, be patient, savor these days. But I'll tell you, this recruiting period, it's going to turn some of my hair more gray than it already is. Just kind of following this stuff and hearing the stories behind the scenes, consuming articles. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to get into the weeds a little bit about what's going on with high school recruiting right now. And it's a shame that this is happening. I'll start by saying that. And it really, it has nothing to do with South Carolina in terms of my opinion on it. It really has more to do, as far as South Carolina is concerned, with it's grabbed my attention. And so I've dug into it a little more because it is happening around South Carolina. And that's this whole notion of NIL deals and money and all that with high school recruits. Now, let's just kind of take everybody back. You know, the House settlement was on the horizon, right? And what that said was that's the cap and all that happy jazz. And what happened was the reason you saw, you know, basketball players who aren't pros, and mediocre football players and guys that, you know, just jumped in the portal for the heck of it because their agent told them to or whatnot, you know, cash out a little bit because teams were basically had double money and they could do what's called front load. You know, South Carolina was no different with that. And so they could pay out however many millions before July 1st and then still have the rev share left over. And a lot of collectives were essentially sitting on, I guess, use it or lose it money because it was booster money that was facilitated for those purposes. So they spent, you know, and a lot of schools did that, especially in men's basketball. And then it lingered. They couldn't come to an agreement to get it passed or settled officially. And so baseball somewhat had that. You know, South Carolina did a good job of front loading with the transfer portal and all that good stuff. You know, but what you didn't expect was with this class of 2026, you know, a lot of promises being made where the math just does not work with some of these offers. And you see it happening, you know, and you see, you know, with the Texas Tech situation, with the offensive tackle that signed with them, his agent got three years, 5.1 million, and you're like, well, 3 years guaranteed at that. You know, that's going to take a chunk of your entire athletics department cap money, uh, you know, over and above, you know, I mean, you know, with one offensive tackle, an 85 man roster, you know, it's not Superman. It's not a quarterback. It's a high school offensive lineman, folks. Same thing with the kid that went to Miami, you know, and so you start hearing about this and all this pop up, and it's just like, wow, you know, and you know, you look at like Georgia, for example, with Jared Curtis, you know, that deal for him, a 5-star quarterback, that's not it wasn't egregious. You know, they did have some outside NIL attached to it, but it was guaranteed. And you know, my understanding is the money kind of came in a little lower than Oregon, but you know that's one thing. But the Texas Tech deal, the offensive tackle deal, I get it. Offensive tackles are valuable when you're talking about position value and all that good stuff. But I still maintain when you're talking about a high school guy, they're 50-50. I mean, you look at the draft every year and you look at the tackles taken. Half of them are your five-star guys that end up playing like five stars and being really good. Half of them are guys that were like two stars that just grew, or I mean, you're basically betting on God slash Mother Nature, or whatever your belief is there, in terms of will this kid grow and physically mature. Some guys that are five-star offensive tackles, like Mitch Hyatt from Clemson, good college players, could not put on the weight to be an NFL draft pick. And so, and that's Mother Nature. That's just, you know, I don't know how you determine that value, at that stage in a player's life. And that's nothing against any of these players. They're very good. If I were ranking them, I mean, the kid from Missouri that went to Miami is one of the best tackles on film I've seen. I mean, he's nasty and big and athletic, how you draw him up. But, I don't think I would have broken the budget. So here's the thing about that. That means they're not. I mean, these aren't blithering idiots out there. They're not sitting there offering a bunch of money to a high school kid to get him to sign, and then, oh gosh, we're over the cap. What shall we do? I mean, that's not what's happening. And so, the best way I can kind of sketch this out is, I was reading Ross Dellinger's article from Big 12 Media Days, and this put a big old spotlight on it, folks. And this is what's going to be sad about the state of college sports. The Big 12 coaches, they have no idea what's going on. Kenny Dillingham's talking about from Arizona State. They won the league last year. That recruiting is dead, and he's all about retention. I don't care if I finish last in recruiting anymore. I'm all about retention. Scott Satterfield from Cincinnati is like, well, I didn't, well, nobody knows anything. We thought we'd all be under a cap, but obviously some schools aren't doing it. Texas Tech. Scott Frost he has no idea. You know, Kansas State's coach, Kleiman, did no idea. We don't know the rules. I think Dillingham was in the opening of the article. It's on Yahoo Sports. Said, we have no idea what the rules are. We have no idea what to do. Joey McGuire from Texas Tech starts talking about, well, we had to do what we had to do because we have to compete with the Blue Bloods in the SEC and the Big Ten, and that's important, And so there you go. There's the response from Lubbock. And so, it gets into a weird stew of things. And the schools that are out there operating like this, a lot of them are in one state, a very wealthy state and big state. Some have won some have never won at all. Uh, some haven't won in quite some time. Some are looking to get over the hump at some point, but never really have as a program. It's not like it's Ohio State, Alabama, Notre Dame, Michigan, all those blue blood schools that we all associate with, Southern Cal. It's not like those guys don't have NIL plans, but they're much more in line with everybody else. Clemson and Georgia, specifically here in the neighborhood, are doing things the right way. And you can tell, like Carolina did not lose Pierre PJ Dean to Georgia because of money. They lost Dean to Georgia because his brother played there and the family was very comfortable with him going to Georgia. And that won out at the end of the day, no matter how much you like South Carolina. It was your good old fashioned recruiting battle. Carter Meadows and Julian Walker did not opt for Michigan because there was some egregious amount of money that the Wolverines threw at them. South Carolina was right there with all that. It's Michigan, so there's that. But then there's other schools that money is an issue, and it's like this, there's a situation where a player, and I'll keep the schools out of it, but there's a player who really wants to go to one school. He's more comfortable there. The comfort level, that's obviously what all recruiting decisions are based on, and money makes you comfortable, obviously, so it impacts that. But if you took money out of the equation, he would be going to one school. But he's got kind of a personal situation where his family financially needs it, and I guess at 17 years old, he's going to go out and be the person that saves his family, and I'll more power to him. More power to him. But the problem with that is, where is this other school for this player coming up with this amount of money? Because if you just use common sense and the least little bit of roster management and crunch the numbers, it makes no sense. Especially when you look at a lot of these places and you see the other recruits. So those guys just come for free, or is this Vandy baseball back in the day and they're on academic? I mean, what's the deal? What's the deal? And it's a shame because it's not like, these schools are the winning, big time winning teams, in many cases. Sometimes they are. I don't want to call out schools individually. I'm just passing along what I've heard. And so what it seems to me, folks, is that we all had the house settlement. Everybody got on board with the house settlement. Everybody publicly says we've opted in and this is going to change college athletics, and schools are raising ticket prices, and we need to get this money together and all that. And that's a very forward facing public stance. Whereas behind the scenes, the people that actually fundamentally operate recruiting and all that are doing everything they can to undermine it, with the opinion that none of this is going to hold up in court at the end of the day. The Delote thing isn't going to hold up. Somebody's going to get sued. And so what they're hedging their bets on here is, because, and they've got it, they got it to spin, is, we're gonna not ask permission, ask forgiveness later, and just count on some sort of legal challenge, destroying the whole thing. Meanwhile, we can get a strategic advantage by allegedly landing all these big time high school recruits. That's the thing. Never mind the fact that that type of investment with high school players in football is equivalent to putting your life savings in the subprime housing market in 2005. I mean, you know, yes, these are good players with potential. They're not proven commodities. And then if the house settlement holds, you're going to run into a retention issue. Some of these schools are going to have massive portal. They're going to, it's similar to the subprime housing thing, because what that was back in the day, gosh, we had just started thebigspur.com when all that hit too. How afraid was I? What happened back then was everybody loaded up on these bad mortgages, and then they sold them as commodities, and these banks were holding billions of dollars worth of them, and it was just crap product. And the whole thing kind of collapsed. There had to be a bailout or whatever. And it's similar to that, because what's going to happen is these players that are overpaid, you know, let's take the human nature factor. Let's just call it like it is. There's about 10% of those guys out there that are self starters and all that good stuff that don't need any structure. They're just going to naturally work hard and love the game and go. Then there's like a wide middle, about 80%, are going to, they need a little structure and motivation. There may be some bumps in the road early. That's why you have red shirts and things like that. While they adjust to college, red shirting is still common. Maybe they play on special teams. And then by the time year two gets here, they're adjusted and they're fine, because it's such a big leap to go from high school to college. And there's about 10% of them that recruiting never ends, and they're just going to cash checks, and they're going to get in the portal 2 or 3 times before they finally end up in FCS. And maybe then at some point they may have a good year. and their career totally gets sidetracked. That's just kind of how it is. So you're gambling in the middle that some are going to break your way and stick it out. That's this type of notion that these players from high school have arrived and deserve all this money, which I don't believe. Look, deserve, not from a football standpoint. Personally, I'm happier than a pig in slop that some of these guys are going to to take care of their family because of something they did in high school. I wish maybe I would have done something great in high school and gotten rewarded financially for it. But I'm not jelly. I mean, happy more. This is America. I'm happy for them on a personal level. From a football standpoint, there's no way in hell I would pay anybody that much. No, I don't. I mean, you got to be realistic about things like rankings too. I did rankings for years, and what they are, and the best I can define them. Because that's it too. How do you determine what a blue chip prospect is? When you've got 100 and something different schools that value different things and evaluate. I mean, you put 100 football evaluators in a room, give them a pool of 1,000 players, tell them to come up with a top five, and don't let them talk to each other and don't let them read the internet, and just tell them to watch the film, and namelessly watch them in person. They're going to come up with different top fives. Maybe in some cases, a lot of different number ones. Okay. It's just how it is. You see it in the NFL scouting departments. You see it with draft people. Anybody that evaluates this game, it's largely a guessing game. And what recruiting rankings are basically odds. We have enough data to know that, hey, it's better to have more blue chip players than not. I'm not talking about the blue chip ratio. If you drill it down individually, which I like to do, statistics, that doesn't mean, again, we're dealing with individuals and psychology and young people and all that. Statistically, you know, your 4 and 5 star players have a statistical better chance of making it to the NFL than your 3 and 2 star players. That's just how it is. It's statistics. So I'm not saying it's not good to sign those guys because your odds are higher. It's like the Vegas over under every year. It's like a futures kind of thing. So what you're basically doing is hedging. You're putting big bets down on these odds. I just don't know that I would do that. I just think it's and why it's going to collapse, similar to the subprime housing market, like I said, is that at some point, booster money's going to dry up. The player's not going to be that good. You're going to make promises that you can't keep, and then they're going to get in the portal. And you're going to lose them. So what was all that for? To win signing day? Great. Kenny Dillingham says he doesn't care if he wins signing day or not. Frankly, I don't think he should, and then you take away maybe from your other players that are there as far as retention goes. They get mad. It could ruin your locker room. I mean, like in the example of, the player I mentioned earlier has family issues. Yeah, that's all well and good, and you wish you could help. But are you going to pay him more than your starters? Your guys that have been there working? No. How about no? And that's just how it goes, man. I mean, it's just one of those things where, I think there are certain actors, in the space that are kind of putting on a happy face about the house settlement and then undermining it and hedging their bets that it's going to collapse because the math does not work. And I'm not alone in this. This is not a South Carolina thing. The Big 12, go look at the reports from Ross Dellinger from Big 12 Media Days if you don't want to believe me, because that whole conference is talking about it. And it sounds like sour grapes from some and whining from some. And I mean, Hugh Freeze mentioned it the other day. I agree with Hugh Freeze. I just don't know that I would have spoken about it right now. I don't think their fans really wanted to hear that. But it came across as an excuse, and he hasn't won and all that good stuff. But it's one of those things where you sort of look at it and it's like, well, the vast majority of these schools who are party to the House settlement are trying to play by the new rules. And then you have bad actors that are not. And there's no disclosure. There's no, barring a major investigation. I mean, who's going to do that? There's nothing you can do. It could just be they're lying, and they have no intention of paying for these guys. They just wanted to get them signed and in there, and then things change. I mean, you've got a lot of problems with this, and I think college athletics right now lacks leadership, um, and lacks, and it's probably always been this way, folks. It's probably always been a free for all, every man for himself. You figure out a system that works at one place, and that's how you win. Look, I get it, and that's happened throughout the history of the sport, even college football especially. I get it, because you win. That's why a lot of programs for a while, you'd see them win big, and they go on probation. Southern Cal, Miami. Uh, Boy, those things don't even look serious now. Um, I get it. It is definitely, like I said earlier, a ask forgiveness later. Better to ask forgiveness than permission kind of space. But you do have situations, and like I said, it's a handful of schools out there just I mean, publicly saying they support the House, and then as far as how they're recruiting and acting and behaving behind the scenes, there's the math just doesn't work unless they're completely stupid. I guess nothing astonishes me anymore. And like I said, football beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Maybe they do think these guys are like the best. Oh, we got to overpay for him. What? 10% of your entire athletics department rev share budget? Great. It's insane. It's insane. And then you have the agents going on social media trying to falsely inflate the market because they know it's going to deflate or crash at some point. Um, Hedging their bets because you kind of look at the House settlement and how legally a lot of legal people think it's very flimsy and can be challenged, and there's already challenges. Thomas Castellanos, the guy, by the way, just as an aside here, there's no show, so I can't really complain about other things happening elsewhere. But this is a guy that signed with UCF, didn't make it, goes to Boston College, comes in, he's the big hero, saves the day, takes over as the starter, leads him to a win at Florida State. Had an injury, sat down, didn't perform well. Bill O'Brien, one of the best quarterbacks coaches in America, benches him and he just abandons his team in the middle of things. Then he goes and talks crap about Alabama. They don't have Nick Saban to save him. Um, he's at Florida State, and all of a sudden, I guess his representation he is challenging the House settlement based on the college football playoff being a part of it. So here's the message I think he's sending, and this is ridiculous, especially for somebody that abandoned his team. You're supposed to be the quarterback, you're supposed to be the leader. You probably have no chance to play pro football as it is because of your size, but yet, you're caring about everything besides football and leading Florida State back to prominence, and also providing bulletin board material for the Crimson Tide in the opener. Thanks for poking that bear, no pun intended. Um, and so now you're saying, well, you're having the audacity on a 2-10 team to say, well, I still think the playoff needs to pay us this, and this. Who is advising this kid? You know, Makes me want to pull against Florida State. Um, anyway, so you got crap like that going on as well out there, and that all kind of reinforces the House settlement is flimsy legally, and so Are we gonna be able to pass a law in Congress? I don't know. It's a headache thinking about it. You have some people out there that have dramatically different views of the whole thing. And there's no leadership, folks. There's no leadership because we are at the point in time with college athletics to where there's a lot of things that need to be tweaked, just so it can get back to being competition on the field, and it can get back to being somewhat fair. It's never really been fair. I mean, any kind of sport where you don't have like a draft set up, and you don't have rules designed to give the teams that aren't as good a chance, and it's not fair. LSU, for example, they're located in a talent-rich state in Louisiana, along the I-10 corridor. They have great access to players. Is it fair that they're located in Louisiana and they're the school in Louisiana, compared to like a Texas Tech, who I mentioned, out in Lubbock, kind of the third, fourth most popular team in the state, and kind of an outpost. How about Virginia Tech's geographic setup that we talked about when we previewed them earlier this week? A lot of it's geography and just where you are, and it benefits some, does not benefit others. I mean, you have programs that have worked around it through the years, like Nebraska, for example. But then they started sliding, and so you see what's happened. First bowl game in 10 years. Way to go, Matt Rule. But it's one of those things. It's never been fair, but this, when you have certain schools acting one way, and then or a handful of them, and then everybody else is trying to do the other, and there's really no recourse. What do you really have? Because you don't have leadership. I mean, who's going to step in? The NCAA is not going to do anything. This new college sports commission, the power commissioners have come up with, seems toothless so far. They're still trying to decide with the lawyers like what the rules are. Until there's rules, I mean, how do you expect people to follow them? Because they're just going to interpret it different. And again, they'll ask forgiveness later, or they'll just look at the player and say, sorry, we can't pay you that, but you've already signed. You can get in the portal if you want. How's that fair to that player and his family? It's not. But there's no leadership. And then amongst the people that are leaders, I am over this whole conference rivalry thing. I was reading an article, Cody Campbell, who at Texas Tech is funding their all of their stuff, but he's actually got some pretty good ideas, while at the same time being part of the problem. But I think he's compartmentalized it, and so he's talking about how they need to all pool their TV money and everybody gets the same and all that, and the Big Ten and SEC are like, hey, no. They quote an SEC sport. Why should we fund everybody else when they're bearing fruit? I mean, when we're the ones bearing fruit. I agree with that from an SEC standpoint. Um, I get it. And as long as we're in this era, that's the way it's going to be. And if that's the way it's going to be, then I certainly want the SEC to get all the money they can. It affects South Carolina. But is that the right attitude for college sports? No. And that trickles down to individual schools because, like I said, there's a handful of actors out there. So what are they going to do? What are these schools going to do? I mean, what happens if everybody looks at these 4 or 5 schools and says, all right, you can just go play by yourself. You can spend as much as you want. You can have all the best players, but nobody's going to play you. So you guys could just go play, whoever. Play Canadian teams, play European club teams. We don't give a crap. Play each other 4 times in a season and have your own playoff. Bye. And everybody be excited about that and all that. And then it'll be boring. It'll be like watching an interpretation a 3 hour interpretation of the Iliad and the Odyssey at a Starbucks with green haired baristas playing the parts over and over and over again by the time that thing is a decade old. And you may could get some others to come along with you, maybe get to 9, 10 schools. Then the rest of college football's fine. And it's sad. You miss them. But they're the ones that wanted that. They're the ones that have the audacity and the hubris to believe that somehow, they're going to find a way around these rules and, oh, it's going to help us win. And I'm like, I look at somebody, they never win. Most of them are not big winners. They're not completely losers, but some of them, you kind of look at it like, well, keep doing all that and keep on keeping on because you've recruited well before and things have not changed. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I just see it's impacting a lot of high school decisions, and I think the transfer portal is definitely one thing. That's definitely it's all market driven. This is America, like I said, and so, but it's also a sport, and you also have to be realistic about some of this stuff, and understand. Yes, Nick Saban won all those national championships because he signed great players, but he's also the best evaluator in the history of college football. And a lot of those highly ranked classes were, players that, amongst the best that he picked the right ones. There are other schools that have recruited in the top 5 that go 5-7 against ACC schedules. Think about that. So, everybody that thinks that's the way, it's helpful. But if you're going to try to drag down the entire sport and undermine the best chance it has to get back to normal, or at least toward normal, with the House settlement, you're going to undermine all that because of that, then you don't deserve to win. So anyway, this is not related to this previous conversation, but I did put an update on thebigspur.com yesterday. JB Sabaz looks like he's going to Tennessee. At the end of the day, that's the right decision for him. He felt that's just kind of how I'm going to leave it. That I think that's one of those things where the public comments didn't really match up with the decision and the nuts and bolts that went into the decision. I do think he respects and likes South Carolina quite a bit. Tamarian Watkins, South Carolina's not going down without a fight in that one. We'll see what happens there. Samari Matthews, the more I think about it, I don't know, man. I just have a suspicion he picks the Longhorns on Friday. The Rasul Faison decision is supposed to come down today. I don't have any idea what'll happen. I know folks on social media are anxiously awaiting for it, and they've done a good job of trying to, I guess, push the needle or whatever. So hats off to you out there in the Twitterverse. But we'll see what happens with that. And certainly we'll have complete coverage on thebigspur.com and right here. This has been Coffee with JC Shurburtt. Have a great day, everybody. Holla.